is Vice President for Oil Sands and Arctic Issues at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Institute for 21st Century Energy. Cook is responsible for leading the Institute's efforts to promote and expand support for the development of Canadian oil sands and access to Arctic resources. Before joining the Chamber, Cook was Director of Federal Relations at the American Petroleum Institute, we call it API, where he was API's Chief Advocate and Issue Manager for all downstream and refining related issues affecting the oil and natural gas industry. Cook was responsible for initiating and managing API's ongoing multifaceted oil sand strategy and campaign. Cook also directed API's renewable fuels and energy issue advocacy on Capitol Hill and with the administration presently there, including during the 2005 and 07 energy bill debates. So this is going to be interesting. I'd love to hear about oil and all the action that's going on up in South Dakota. So come on in and we welcome you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for having me. I also want to thank not only for you for hosting some event allowing us to participate, but for the Missouri Trucking Association support for the Partnership with Fuel America. I'll get right into this. I've got a lot of slides, but it's not move through maybe so we can leave some time for some Q&A, and I know you have some other speakers coming up as well after me. But I work for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and we're the largest business organization, pro-business trade association in the world. We also have just started a few years ago this Institute for 21st Century Energy, which is was kind of intended to try to go out and promote that we need all forms of energy, that businesses across business sectors are recognizing that there was a need to be out talking more about hot energy issues that were continuing to rise up on people's radar screens, and there continue to be a lack of real planning and focus on energy policy going forward. So we at the Chamber formed this institute, and we decided that it would focus on a lot of positive messaging, and we'll take issue and exception to a lot of different bad energy policy, but we also need to promote this all of the above strategy. And so I'll talk a lot about oil and gas today and a lot about coal because that's more my background, but really we also promote the use of nuclear, we promote the need for alternatives and define energy efficiencies as well. They all need to be part of an energy mix. So I'll get right into it, but I'll start with allowing you to ask yourself some questions about energy policy. You don't have to raise your hand and answer that, but particularly hydraulic fracturing. Common conversation a few years ago, you would never have heard about this, but wanted to see when you think about hydraulic fracturing was first used in this country. So 1949, it's an old technology that's been used, but it's been married with newer technologies, and that kind of directional drilling allowed us to get to resources that we haven't been able to get at in a number of years. We knew we were there. There were resources that were locked in what we call really hard shell, but we were now able to find ways to get that out. It's really created a boom in places like North and South Dakota and Pennsylvania and other parts of the as you move into the West Carolina. So just to give you an idea, there's over 1 million producing wells in this country right now. It continues to increase. It's not something that's new, but there's been a lot of controversy fostered by a lot of people and organizations about raising concerns about it. But you should know that it's been used for a long time in this country. Second question, what's our largest supplier of imported oil? Typically people think in terms of what I would think of when I was growing up in the 70s, we think what happened in OPEC, the Middle East, it's Canada. We've been importing more oil from Canada than anywhere else in the world. About 24% of our daily imports come from Canada. It's an exceptional amount, either coming in a pipeline or truck or rail. I'll get to that a little bit. Coal, we have a tremendous amount of coal in this country. We've been using a lot less, and it's getting harder and harder to use it because the power plants and the regulations are affecting them. We've got at least 250 years of coal in the current technology that we're aware of right now. Estimates actually are much higher of known reserves, but not ones that coal that we can get at. But we keep saying as technology keeps opportunities for us to get at this resource. But we're going to talk a little bit about barriers and what's happening and what's making it difficult to get to some of these resources. But I also just wanted to put this slide up there so that you have an understanding a little bit about what the federal government's view of what's your resources here in this state. And as I mentioned, you get about 80% of your electricity generation comes from coal, and that's greatly diminishing across the country. So what's going on in this country? What's going on in the world on energy? Globally, you're looking at tremendous demand for energy use, and we're competing more and more and more for resources, particularly with looking at places in Africa and Asia, primarily Asia, but you're also having, believe it or not, countries that are having tremendous development that have some of these resources. Nigeria, places in the Middle East that are starting to see some growth in manufacturing. They're also have great needs for these resources, but particularly we're looking at places like China, as we all talk about, where there's just massive demand that's happening there. And we have to kind of start to understand that and what that means for our country. But there's some statistics there that are pretty shocking, but that's what we're going to be competing against going forward globally. And we're starting to see these companies come into places like Canada, or these companies that are backed by their governments and start to buy up resources, trying to see where, so they can take advantage of not only the resources, but perhaps the technologies as well. And what does that mean? You know, again, some numbers globally, where you're going to see huge increases in population, huge increases in demand, more and more people moving into cities, changing economies with younger people using more and more handheld technologies and things that require a lot of energy, and that's going to affect what kind of policy and what direction we're going in as a country. So what's happening here in the United States? These are projections from the federal government, and they show that we have only 11%. That number was a little higher a few years ago, but due to some dampening in the economy as well as some changes in energy efficiency with cars and vehicles and things, the numbers come down. It used to be as high as 21% projections. But as you look at this mix, you can see things don't change too dramatically. We have still a huge demand and need for coal, still have a huge demand and need for petroleum and other liquids, but also there's a growth in the use of biofuels, and there are some use of other renewables, but really we're still going to be very dependent on fossil energy in this country. And we talk a little bit about policy. We're going to need to understand what that means in our energy mix, and what's happening right now with some other views that we should be moving in that direction. So when we start to look at one of the things that we can go around and talk about is what is happening? You asked me, I just showed you we're going to need this energy demand. We have this energy demand. It's going to come from mostly resources that we've been utilizing already. So what's going to happen with oil exploration in this country? We're starting to hear some great things, and I'll talk a little bit more about that with regard to projections and getting at oil that we couldn't get at before. What's happening with this natural gas and these developments in places around the country that we hadn't been developing in oil and natural gas before? What opportunities are there? We're looking at a potential nuclear renaissance, but now we have some problems with where do we store this nuclear waste? We can't move forward on this Yucca Mountain project that was supposed to be the Federal Reserve for all the sorts of nuclear waste in this country, and that's been stalled. It's affecting whether nuclear plants are getting built, and some of the ideas of the projections about building new plants, they're not moving forward right now. Coal plants, recent changes in regulations have impacted the coal industry and the power generation industry to the point where it's virtually impossible to build a new coal-fired electricity plant in this country. And that should be some real cause for concern, and it's forcing companies to make some real hard decisions on where they're making investments, and it's going to start affecting consumers and commercial users who use a lot of manufacturers who use a lot of electricity. The prospects for renewables. You probably heard there's a lot of battle going on right now in Washington over subsidies for the wind energy industry. And also right now biofuels, the use has increased tremendously, but now there's been some changes in the subsidies, and there are also changes as to how much of the biofuels you can get into vehicles, and what are the requirements for some of the blenders and the refiners for having to use them. So a lot of debate on those issues. They're going to need to be addressed because in the meantime, there's uncertainty. There's been some ethanol plants that close, and so that industry needs to have an understanding what the playing field is for that going forward. And I think a lot of consumers need to do as well. People power. There's a real lack of engineers and people going into the extractive industries these days. And so those companies, as there's some of that growth that's happening in North Dakota and Pennsylvania and places, are having trouble finding engineers and people to go into those fields, and there's a brain drain that's happening with this huge gap. And, a lot of those folks are retiring, and there's just not a lot of young people stepping into those voids. People are going to these places to look for jobs, but they really need some of the engineers and the people who understand the geologies and understand how to get these, run these extractive industries, plants, and operations in order to get that energy out. I also put up, you probably all heard of NIMBY, the Not My Backyard, but we've come up with a few other variations that are similar to the theme. Banana, which is build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. We'll talk a little more about that, but that's pretty common these days. Note, which is not on planet Earth. K, which is citizens against virtually everything. And then we obviously have NIMBY. So there are little slight variations, but it's different things that the industry, and I think across the board, is dealing with. But anyone involved in trying to build big projects, or anyone involved in trying to build any infrastructure, whether it's roads and bridges, whether it's toll plazas, you talk about that, we can talk about that, we can talk about pipelines, we can talk about electricity generation, power lines that need to be strung. These are real serious problems, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. I have a pretty interesting slide on the project that we work on. I think we find it pretty interesting. But, so we're trying to talk about this common sense energy policy, and we're trying to look at what we have as far as these resources and projections about these resources that we've known have been around for a while, but as particularly this administration has talked about being transformational, moving into a different era, and people have these visions of these renewable fuels that we have tremendous resources in conventional fuels that we've known have been around for a long time. But with new technology and the same advancements that we're all hoping for is going to happen with wind energy and solar and new battery technologies, and here in the trucking industry, you're always talking about natural gas developments and new engines and some of those sorts of technologies and advancements. There's tremendous strides that have been made in technologies and advancements in the natural gas and particularly the oil industry that are providing us with a tremendous amount of resources. And so there's still a direction. Technology is happening, and it's happening fast, and businesses are finding ways to make these things happen. So we have to understand that we have these resources, and we're now able to get to some of them more than we ever thought before. These projections continue to keep increasing. And it's mean tremendous opportunity for our country. But what's happening? You can't get at something. This is a map that shows you where we know there's some resources and where we're able to drill in right now with oil and natural gas offshore. We're not even allowing the industry to go offshore within those red areas to test and find out what's actually out there. These are projections that were done years ago, and when Rayola speaks, maybe we have some similar slides, but she can talk about what's happening offshore. We have this great amount of resources that we just can't get to, and that's offshore. Onshore, and we've had all these shale resources that we're now able to find that we can get to some of this. These are creating these economic booms in these states, but in other states as well, where people are supplying them and the jobs are becoming available for people shipping goods and services into those areas. But something to keep in mind, though, is that a lot of this resources, even on land, we can't get to. Drilling numbers, you hear people in Washington talking about, well, there's all this drilling that's happening. It's happening because industry is going to private landowners and taking on private property and creating leases. But federal lands that are owned by taxpayers, owned by you and I, not national parks or other sorts of lands that are controlled by Minerals Management Service, Bureau of Land Management, or somewhere else, have put most of this drilling off. You can't do it. You're just not allowed to go on these lands and do that. And so there's questions for us, but as we've created ways to get at this more efficiently, we found ways to do it more environmentally friendly. We're using newer technologies. We have these resources, but we can't get to them. This shows you what the projections are. This again comes from the federal government about increases on non-federal lands and decreases in drilling on federal lands, and that's a problem that we want to see addressed. So, shale alone, I'm sure you'll probably have some more conversation about that because it's certainly going to be affecting your industry. But this oil shale and shale oil, shale gas that you've heard of being developed, it's just been a tremendous boon to some of the states across the country. I go to North Carolina next week. 3% unemployment. They can't keep people, or they can't get enough people to work up there. And you talk to the impact that it's having on these communities and what it means. First, these folks are trying to learn to adjust with these booms that are happening in parts of the northwestern part of the state. But it's really fascinating. We have one partner in our organization who is owns owns some auto parts stores. He went from, I think it was 6 or 7 stores about 6 years ago to 24 stores now. He owns every one of the buildings, and he has to pay people a month in advance because he can't keep the workers in his working for him. So they want to go and work in the office and make more money. So it's just been a tremendous boon. And we've even found other businesses are willing to work with us who are bankers, who are, what a small bank that came to us from, I don't know, this is Nebraska. It's my biggest loan out right now is a trucking company who's shipping pipe from parts of Colorado up north to not only North Dakota, but up into Canada as well. So there's just a tremendous opportunity there. It's meaning a lot to some of these communities. And we project, projections are even better as I start to look at what these resources are available. And there's people smarter than I am who put together some modeling and looked at what is the potential increases in jobs. And just something else to keep in mind, as we talk about developing these massive resources, for every barrel of oil, for every amount of gas that we develop in the United States, we're not having to import from somewhere else in the country. The same goes for Canada. For all this oil that's happening, the development that's happening in Canada, we're not having to import that from somewhere else, and that means a lot. I mentioned we were growing up in the 70s, we remember the oil embargoes, we remember what it meant to have these other countries. We've always been looking at what's happening in the Middle East and some of the instability. Those countries don't have our interests in mind. And so not only does it mean a lot to jobs and the economy, but it means a lot to energy security as well. And it's just as I mentioned, this is just a chart just showing you the increases in jobs in the oil fields right now. And so there's a lot going on despite some of the regulation, despite what that means to we're going to talk about a little bit about stopping some of the drilling that's happening on federal lands and things. There's huge increases in the oil field work increases. There's been a lot. It's been huge. So I just mentioned this. There's more and more that the projections as we're looking at these resources and the technology that's been able to get at them. There's more and more of these think tank leaders and these people are starting to come out and say we could potentially be a powerhouse globally. And as we're looking to see what's happening out in other places in the world, and their demand is going to need to be increasing as these countries are developing, we might be able to be the new OPEC of natural gas here in North America, or the new OPEC for oil. If we can start to be able to get to these resources, what does that mean? What is that going to mean for us going forward? I've also mentioned Canada. I said I'm responsible for promoting Canadian energy. We have this huge partner up north of us who's found these resources up in Alberta that are 10, 15 years ago they were being developed, but they weren't being developed at the rate that they are today. And it's because of technology and advancements in technology. And I was working at the Department of Energy back in 2001, and when we had some people come to us and talk to us about some of this technology, and this company that was looking for a loan. And people at DOE had been there for years said, you know what, forget about it. They're never going to develop that oil. Oil has to get to be $70 a barrel before that makes any sense to invest in anything like that. And that's not happening anytime soon. Well, here we go, a few years later, we've gone up, and there was tremendous investment made up there in Canada, and they're finding new efficiencies, and they're finding ways to get to these resources, and it's meant a lot for our country. We, not only are we estimating that we can go from 1.9 million barrels a day of imports from there, we potentially go up to 3.5 million in just a few years. We're finding that there's we've estimated about almost in 49 states there's companies supplying goods and services up to the oil fields in Canada. At the tune of about 80,000 workers in America today are making something that's being sent up there, whether it's your Caterpillar trucks and the tires, or whether it's widgets or some sort of coveralls or gloves. There's almost 80,000 workers and the tune of almost 2,000 companies nationwide that are selling goods and services up to Canada. So for every dollar that we spend in import oil from Canada, about 90 cents of it comes back to us from something that they purchase. And just recently at one of these sites, this new kind of drilling that they're using, this new technology, that it was a facility that was probably a $3 billion investment. They told me over 80% of what they purchased to build that facility came from the United States. So that means a lot. It's something to remember, not only to talk about this energy security, but it's good for our economy. We have a great trade partner in Canada that we're going to continue to promote at the Chamber that there's tremendous opportunity there for us. And it means that we have to continue to find ways to bring some of that energy down because it's going to mean a lot for us here in America. And that leads me to the Keystone XL pipeline. Many of you obviously are aware of this. A few years ago, we never heard of Canadian Oil, been aware of any of those sorts of things I was just talking about until this unfortunate circumstance happened, the politics around the Keystone XL pipeline. For us at the Chamber, it was a no-brainer. It's a $7 billion private sector investment, building 1,600 miles of pipeline 13,000 jobs being created in manufacturing and construction of the pipeline. You're looking at about 7,000 or 8,000 additional jobs related to that, whether it's in other sorts of innkeepers and all the sorts of jobs that result from working in the restaurants and the additional economic benefits of those communities along the pipeline. So for us, it was a no-brainer. It's been unfortunate. It's been stalled. It's not the only pipeline that comes down from Canada. There's a whole number of others. But we just feel that it was a bad signal to send not only to industry, it's a bad signal to send to investors. It's a bad signal to send to our partners up north. Fortunately, TransCanada started this past summer building a southern line. They didn't need a permission from the president in order to do that. They got permits in line from the Army Corps of Engineers and some other organizations. But now they're still trying to get that pipeline built north. They've worked from Alberta down to Kansas there. They've already, TransCanada, the pipeline company, has resubmitted a permit application. They've moved the pipeline a little further east around some of the sensitive areas that the states and citizens in Nebraska were concerned about. We're just waiting for the governor of Nebraska to put forward the plan after he approves it to the president, and hopefully the president, either president will, whoever we the president will approve it as soon as possible. President Obama and his administration indicated they would put off making a decision until spring, sometime in the first quarter of next year. We're really hoping that we're going to continue to encourage him and ask you to encourage him to make that decision sooner, because it's an economic opportunity that just is too good to miss. But I mentioned, just people often ask me, that's the only pipeline. How is this oil getting down here? Obviously, it's coming down in other ways. There's a number of other pipelines coming down on rail. It's also being trucked down and shipped down on trucks. But this isn't something new. There's pipelines around all over the country, and this is just one map that shows you a number of the different pipelines that have already been built and are sending crude down from Canada. One of the pipelines, the Alberta Clipper, the red one, was actually permitted by the Obama administration back in 2009. So they didn't seem to be averse to bringing that crude down then, but they seem to be now. And so we're going to continue to try to promote that. We need to build this pipeline. We need to build more infrastructure. And so building infrastructure is a challenge. We did a project just a couple of years ago. It took over a year to do. We finished up in the spring of 2011. There are 350 projects at that time of that year we identified in this country that were energy projects that were stalled, postponed, or just completely stopped and never built. 350 projects, $1.1 trillion of investment, and hundreds of thousands of jobs that were stalled due to regulations and what we call green tip efforts. Using regulations efforts by NGOs and environmental organizations to stop these projects. And it's just becoming harder and harder and harder. I told you about building coal plants. It's harder and harder to build any sort of infrastructure in this country. We talk about KXL, we talk about the need to build electricity infrastructure to get wind power and other sorts of electricity out of places like North Dakota and Minnesota and places and things like that. You all know it's hard to get roads and bridges and highways built. It's hard to get anything built these days. This, out of the 350 plants and facilities, over 45% of them were alternative energy projects. And so, I don't know if you're talking about oil and gas and coal, but they were projects like solar plants and facilities and wind plants and facilities. The biggest wind energy project that they were trying to get built offshore in Massachusetts is installed now for 9 years. There's a number of other examples of that too. So it's not just in the extractive industries that are having trouble doing this, it's also the alternative energies as well. And this is just a little chart I like to put up to show you what businesses are dealing with when they're trying to get an understanding of what you're supposed to do in dealing with rulemaking and regulations. And new regulations that are being written, old regulations that are being rewritten. This is just a snapshot of a number of different ones. It's kind of color-coded, so it's kind of neat. I couldn't even tell you what many of them are, but they all impact certainty. They impact industry's ability to understand what the playing field is going forward and where they're supposed to be at any given time that we're trying to meet regulations. So that's just for the EPA. So what are we promoting in the chamber? Again, I talk about all the above strategy, but it does really encompass a lot of different things. We need to maximize efficiencies. We do need to find better technologies that are going to enable us to use our energy resources better and reduce our footprint. We do promote, obviously, that we need to increase oil and gas, domestic gas development. One of the things I failed to mention about the Keystone XL pipeline, that it's not just bringing Canadian oil down. There's a glut of oil that's being developed in North Dakota that's having problems getting into pipelines and they're having trouble getting enough ways to ship it out.